I'm Vicky. I'm from the Apprenticeship Hub that operates in York, North Yorkshire and East Riding. And I'm here with Debbie, who's one of the advisors on the team that goes out and speaks to businesses. And today we're just here to talk about the type of length of programmes that apprenticeships can take. So Debbie, do you want to just let us know how long an apprenticeship is?
Yeah, sure. So the minimum length of time you can be in what's called in learning on an apprenticeship is 12 months. In addition to that, you'd have your endpoint assessment.
And what's the maximum type of apprenticeship then? What's the maximum length you'd be on an apprenticeship?
The maximum length would be when you're looking at your level 7s, which is degree level, and then you'd be looking at about 4 years, 4 to 5 years.
So kind of a typical time that you'd be on a normal degree that you take through university, but you'd be doing it alongside work then.
Yeah.
And what kind of variation then of apprenticeships then would be like your minimum lengths that you'd be looking at, or your maximum lengths? What kind of sectors and things like that would you be looking at?
With your minimum length, you're looking at obviously your level 2s, which is the lowest level you can do in an apprenticeship. And you're probably looking at things like your level 2 in retail or your level 2s in hospitality team member. Then obviously up to your degree levels, it's the longer length. Level 3 business admin, for example, would be 18 months.
Okay.
In learning.
And so you mentioned that you've got the in-learning element, which could be like your minimum of your 12 months. And then you mentioned an endpoint assessment. So do you just want to explain a little bit about what that is?
So endpoint assessment is what it says. It's that time that you're assessed on what you've learned throughout your learning journey. The minimum you'll normally spend in endpoint assessment is 2 months, but that can go up to 4 or 5 months. Again, it's normally dependent on the sector you're in and on the level you're doing. So obviously degree level is going to be a lot longer in endpoint assessment.
So that's kind of adding to the length of the apprenticeship. So you've got about your 12 months in learning as your minimum, and then about a 2 to 4 months on top of that as an endpoint assessment. So you'd be looking at roughly like 18 months if you'd be looking at, and that would be kind of employment as well as learning.
It would, yeah.
In regards to the amount of time that you actually spent learning then, and that you actually spend in the workplace working for the employer, what's the breakdown of that then?
If you're working on a full-time week, which is 30 hours or more, you spend approximately 6 hours of that classed as in your learning time, your study time. However, that doesn't mean that you're going to be necessarily sat in a classroom all that time. It may well be that you're learning whilst you're working.
And when you're saying, like, if you had that 30-hour contract and you'd be learning about 6 hours of that, does that have to be like a block of 6 hours every single week, or could you do a number of weeks and then a block of learning? How would that work?
It's very flexible. It's very dependent on the individual, on the workplace, and also how the training provider's delivering it. So it could be classroom-based, 1 day, 6 hours per week, say in a college environment or a classroom environment. It could be that you're doing it all at your workplace. So you might do 1 hour one day, 2 hours another day, maybe have the following week a full day sat doing. So it's very flexible. That's the whole idea of apprenticeships. It's very flexible.
And so when we're talking about that minimum length of an apprenticeship, then we've been talking a lot about, like, if you're doing a full-time contract, what happens if you're not doing a full-time contract and you're doing part-time work? How does that affect the length of your apprenticeship?
Okay, so say you're working part-time, you'll find that minimum length, the 12 months I talked about, that will get extended. So say you're doing, 20 hours a week, that would be extended to around 18 months, and then your endpoint assessment.
So if you're working part-time, it basically just flexes then. So you do that little bit longer in learning because the hours that you'd be learning, for example, per week could just change ever so slightly according to your hours. Right, that's perfect. Is there anything else you want to mention about durations or about the different types of apprenticeships and how that might be affected in regards to the duration?
It varies depending on the sector. So some sectors, the more practical sectors, the duration tends to be shorter. The more academic, the duration just seems to get that little bit longer.
And you mentioned quite a bit about flexibility. So does the employer get a lot of a say in exactly when the individual might be off learning and the amount of time that the individual spends learning? They
would, yeah. If you're doing learning in a workplace with an independent provider, they generally book in with the apprentice and the employer, and it's got to fit in with business need.
Okay.
So that provider will do the very best to fit in with business need. If you're going day release to a college, then your day is going to be set. So it depends on the apprentice, it depends on the employer.
And a lot of it can come down to as well the different type of training provider, or potentially the different type of apprenticeship and what subject it is that you're actually studying, and a lot of that will count. Right, that's wonderful. Thank you very much.